Bitcoin is worthless artificial gold. I think I should say modestly that I think the whole damn development is disgusting and contrary to the interests of civilization.
This is just a beanie baby that runs on coal.
You know, I agree. I would short it if there was an easy way to do it.
These men all share one thing in common. They are all citizens of advanced economies, with property rights, free speech, a functioning legal system, and stable reserve currencies. Only 13% of our planet's population is born into this.
Is there any chance for a deal in these talks today between Russia and Ukraine?
The other 87% are born in a country with a weak currency or authoritarian regime. These critics are missing the big picture. Anyone with access to the internet can participate in Bitcoin. It runs on a network that does not discriminate. While Western headlines focus on Coinbase going public and tech bros getting fabulously rich,
more than double the company's valuation, with
there is a revolution happening worldwide. For Gates, Munger, and Buffett, Bitcoin is rat poison squared.
The price sits above 50,000 now. Where do you think it's going?
But for Ira from Nigeria, Mo from Sudan, and Carl from Ethiopia, Bitcoin is much more.
I'm hopeful for Nigeria's future. I've seen Bitcoin's potential firsthand. Bitcoin allowed us to fight SARS, a notorious unit of the Nigerian police with a long record of abuses. In October 2020, I joined the Feminist Coalition, which began accepting donations via Flutterwave, a fintech product. This started off well enough, but then the regime started cracking down. Our bank accounts were shuttered. Bitcoin was the only option left. There was no other way to receive, store, and spend money. This was an eye-opening moment. We ended up setting up a BTC Pay server to process donations from around the world.
But Ira isn't the only one with hope for the future. For Kalkasa in Ethiopia, Bitcoin is about bridging the gap between the upper and lower classes in a corrupt system.
Wages do grow, but not on par with inflation. Salaries in urban areas have perhaps doubled over the past decade, but goods have gone up by 3 to 5 times. The upper classes use the dollar as their unit of account, but the poor outside the city, well, dollars are officially illegal for them.
Kassa's brother was arrested for simply having a $20 bill in his pocket, but the arrest wasn't enough to stop Carl.
I created a Telegram group where I pay freelancers, graphic designers, and translators based in Ethiopia with Bitcoin. In America, most people treat Bitcoin as an investment or as a savings account, but here I'm using it as a medium of exchange. It's part of my life.
Under the gold standard, Sudan was a stable economy. 3 Sudanese pound once bought you $1. There was a successful middle class in Khartoum. But what happened after that in the 1960s and the 70s, and continue to happen until today, is that the central bank is taking over and devaluing the currency. Today the inflation is more than 400%. The average citizen is watching their wages stagnate and the cost of living is rising. While Omar al-Bashir and his cronies managed to accumulate massive wealth in form of real estate and bank accounts in foreign banks.
What Mo describes is the Cantillon effect, a systemic plague wherein those closest to the source of the inflation profit, while the rest suffer.
Many Sudanese people are starting to use Bitcoin as a tool to escape corruption and as a lifeboat to survive this economic crisis.
Now, that is not something I think the world needs.
There is something inherently not credible about creating hundreds of billions in virtual wealth with nothing ever actually being accomplished.
Bill Gates,
Charlie Munger,
Warren Buffett, they don't like the technology behind Bitcoin because it's coming to seize a place in the global stage that they used to have just for themselves. Liberation technologies should be invested in, not shorted. And for those comfortable in the dollar bubble, it's time to check your financial privilege.
How you all doing? You're still pretty quiet compared to last year. Right, so next up, my good friend Alex Gladstein is about to come out and host a very, very important session. Alex has just written an amazing book called Check Your Financial Privilege. Please go and check it out. We all love the gains. We all love it when Bitcoin goes up. But really, one of the best things about Bitcoin is how it enables freedom around the world. So this is going to be an incredible session. I want to hear a huge round of applause for everyone as we introduce them out. Okay, firstly is Yeonmi Park. If you haven't heard her on Roga, go check that out. All right, next up we have Farida Nabourema. All right, also a huge round of applause for my friend Fadi, Elsalameen. And my very, very good friend, Alex Gladstein, come on.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. It's such an honor and a privilege to share the stage with these three incredibly noble individuals. Look, I know that for a lot of you, Bitcoin is about number go up. It's about investment. It's about thinking for your family's future, and that's a big part of Bitcoin. But Bitcoin's also about freedom go up, and it's about how a new monetary technology can help liberate people around the world who are stuck in horrible, horrible situations. So I want to start by asking each of my guests to tell you about how money works in their countries or where they came from, and how perhaps in Asia or Africa or the Middle East, money works differently than how it might work here. To start, I'm going to turn to Yeonmi. I've known Yeonmi for many years. She's an incredible author, activist. She escaped from North Korea and has devoted her life to fighting human trafficking and to helping get information back into people stuck in North Korea. So Yeonmi, why don't you start by telling us just a little bit about this black hole of information that you grew up in and what it was like, before you escaped.
So thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you. Hi. I know, I'm so grateful to talk about Bitcoin and also freedom. I mean, without freedom, why do we even need money, right? So it's a unique opportunity to talk about with Bitcoin and freedom. As you can see this satellite photo of my country, do you see that there's a black hole in between South Korea and China? That's where I was born. I was born in a complete darkness. I often joke about that, we have Earth Day in North Korea every day. It might be good for the environment, but not good for the people. In this 21st century, people do not even know what internet is. Growing up in North Korea, I still remember when I was young, the government was telling people that you should deposit money in the bank. And then people did, because we trusted our dear leader. I mean, he was our God to us. Once we put our money in the bank account, it was locked. Nobody could get the money out of the bank accounts. Only people who had a connection to the bankers and the government officials who could get the money out. And so this is a real struggle, right? In North Korea, private property is banned. You cannot own a car, you cannot own a house, you cannot own anything. So therefore, if you make money in the black market system, you have to hide it somewhere in the house. And one time, actually, I still remember my mother's best friend. There was many thieves in North Korea. She was hiding the cash, the hard-earned cash, inside where she was cooking food. And the husband came without knowing and burned the whole thing. So her life saving gone like that. So in North Korea, because we don't know how to hide the cash, I still remember my mother would take the stockings out and put the cash and wrapping around her burning body parts to hide the money, because that was the only way we could carry cash. And by the 2009, we all know that North Korea strived to become a socialist paradise where there's no inequality. So the regime decided, how are we going to make everybody equal? They decided in 2009, we are going to do something called the currency exchange, which means previous money that you had means worth nothing, literally trash.
That people had been saving for decades.
Yes, in the black market for like 70 years, people working in the black markets and saving this money, and the regime wanted to make sure that everybody is equal and take all the power from North Korean people. So they did something called the currency exchange, and they said each family now, they give them only 1 week, 7 days.
1 week, you had 1 week to turn in your old money.
Yes, and they said, and for the Pyongyang people, the country people, only 3 days. Each family can only get new cash that was worth of buying 2 kilograms of rice. So if you're a billionaire, millionaire, your money meant nothing the next day. And after that currency exchange, North Korean people now actually do not have any North Korean money, and they are actually trying to find a way to get US dollars and Chinese yuan.
So the regime found a very cruel way to try to make everyone equal. And this is just a theme that was in these songs that they made you memorize and talk about when you were a child, this paradise that you were in where everyone was equal. In reality, it's sort of like the Animal Farm. Some were more equal than others. And what she just described to you in 2009 is known as demonetization. So cash can help people, and it does help people around the world. A lot of people save around the world, especially in dollars. Under their mattress or somewhere in their house, but there's a very cruel way that the government can even take that from you, and that's again called demonetization, where they say, oh, all that money, that's no longer worth anything anymore. And as you're just telling us, they only gave people a week or even a few days, depending on which caste system you were in. In North Korea, people are geographically separated in castes, depending on the loyalty of your family during the Korean War. And they basically said you only have a certain amount of time to turn that in, and then in exchange you'll get this new money, but you can only get a certain amount. So, I mean, we don't often hear about finance and economics and money in the human rights discussions. I worked on North Korea issues for years and years and years and years and never heard about this or learned about this until I started asking questions about Bitcoin and money. And in that vein, when you were growing up, did they teach you about money in school?
No, I mean, the word in North Korea, profit, is banned.
The word profit is banned.
So, I mean, they think money as an evil, and any business, enterprise, private business is evil. So they don't teach us anything about economy and money. So people, basically, what we have to do is relying on the government, who is going to give us public rations. But they didn't do that. So our only choice was dying from starvation, and that's how I escaped from North Korea. I was 13 years old.
Can you talk a little bit about the role that money played in your escape at all, and maybe how it was a limiting factor, or how you wish you had a different kind of money? Take us through that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's so surreal for me coming from North Korea, actually sitting in Miami, this very liberal place right now with this full of electricity. I know, it's what a life. But when I escaped from North Korea at 13, I arrived in China, and they sold me for less than $300 as a sex slave. And there are right now 300,000 North Korean women in China are being sold. The reason why we are being sold is because we cannot have bank accounts. And when North Korean women get captured and sent back to North Korea, if they somehow able to hide $50, they don't have to die in the prison camp. But the regime is so vicious. They even check everybody's parts you cannot even imagine, and then they even check after you go to the bathroom. So there's no way you can hide anything, or jewelry or money in your body. But something like Bitcoin, if you remember the code or something, you go out, you talk to the broker, they give you the money, you can bribe, you can come out. But because North Korea has no medium like that, they've been suffering and dying from this tragedy.
I think what Yeonmi's describing is kind of the end game of fiat money is totally centrally planned money system that the rulers can arbitrarily change at any time. And that's what the North Korean people have had to endure. But North Korea is something we all must remember, and we're going to get into a little bit later how Bitcoin maybe is being used to help people who've escaped North Korea. But for now, I want to turn our attention to Farida, and I want to talk a little bit about something called the colonial French currency and the legacy of basically colonialism in Africa and the role that money played in that struggle. Farida is an incredibly brave human rights defender from a country called Togo, which was once under French colonialism in the 50s and 60s. And she has an amazing story. So Farida, take it away.
Thank you, Alex. So as you can see it on the map, 14 African countries are still using a colonial money. That money, called the CFA, in French it means the Franc des Colonies Françaises, was created by the French government on the model that the Nazi used during World War II. So literally the Nazi created a currency that was imposed on the French people during the occupation, and the French realized that model was the best way for them to continue controlling those countries' economies. So when we got our independence, my country got it in April 1960. The first president of Togo, Sylvanus Olympio, decided to withdraw Togo from the CFA system. Why? Because all the countries had to keep their gold reserve in the French bank, and the French control 80% of our reserves. We don't have a central bank that is independent. The French control the central banks that were created for us. And at the end of the day, when we need more money because of inflation, we have to borrow our own funds with interest from the French government. So the president of Togo thought it was a scam, and he decided to create the Togolese franc in December 1962. Exactly 1 month later, he was assassinated by former soldiers of the French colonial army in Togo. These soldiers ended up seizing the power, and they ruled the Togo since 1967. And today, we have the son of the first leader, Eyadema Simbe, who was president for 38 years, taking over in 2005 when his father died, making Togo the oldest military regime in Africa, ruled by father and then son. So it's been a situation pretty similar to that of North Korea, 55 years of the same family. But the situation is much worse than that, because Togo is a country of 8 million people. But in those 14 French-speaking African countries, there's a population of over 180 million people. And literally, you have the livelihood of these people depending on a currency that has no value outside of those countries. The worst part of this is that on 2 occasions, in 1964 and then 1994, the French government decided to devalue our money by half. So since World War II, we have literally lost over 100% of the value of our currency. In addition, life has become more expensive because of inflation. Things cost basically over 300 times more than it's used to 5 decades ago. But the money people are earning for their hard work does not match the inflation rate. As a result, you have over 50% of the population living in these countries living in extreme poverty. And unfortunately, every single leader of the African nations that tried to escape this system were either assassinated, like the president of Togo, Sylvanus Olympio, or they were removed by coup. And the worst part today is that we have over the half of the people, the nations ruled by, in the CFA system, they are ruled by governments that are authoritarian, with leaders who have been there for over 40 years. That's the case for Togo, that has father and son in power for 50 years. The case for Gabon, that has father and son. Recently for Chad. So you see the most authoritarian government in Africa, with the poorest population in Africa, using a currency that is colonial and that doesn't give the people any agency.
And I think it's worth dwelling on this just concept of monetary colonialism. And I was able to interview Farida and Fadi, who you saw speak up here on stage from Senegal earlier, last year, and I'd never really understood the monstrosity of this system. And just to break it down quite simply, the French colonial power was able to get cheap resources, tin, oil, uranium for all of its nuclear, programs in France. The French have this incredible nuclear power situation, but it's all coming from Niger, and it was taken basically at below market rates, and the local government had no ability to negotiate that. In fact, when they tried to negotiate it, they were taken out in a coup. So you have this government that's basically using this vast part of the world as a sort of a personal plantation, getting cheap, again, lumber, all kinds of resources. And then what they do is they take the finished goods that they make in France and they sell it back to the CFA countries at higher than market rates. If you are a business in the CFA zone, you have to give first right of refusal to the French. So if you want to if you're the government and you want to have a bridge built, you have to offer it to the French first at below market price. And if they say no, only then can you go talk to the Americans or Chinese or British or somebody else. Likewise, when you're selling goods, you have to offer it at lower prices to the French first, and then if they refuse, you can sell it elsewhere. And what this has done over many decades is basically lead to some of the worst humanitarian conditions in the world. If you look at these countries in white, I mean, these are some of the poorest countries in the world and some of the most authoritarian. I mean, they're always the ones at the bottom of the UN Development Index. You talk about Chad or Mali or Niger. Again, these are countries that people have basically been robbed for decades by a colonial power, and that colonial power got to claim that it gave liberty to Togo. I mean, when de Gaulle, basically, quote unquote, gave liberty, the idea was you guys can have political freedom, but not monetary freedom. So, Farida, you're saying that basically in your country, the pro-democracy movement, the pro-human rights movement has its roots in this idea of monetary freedom. I mean, can you speak a little more to that and how it's part of the identity of your struggle? And can you talk about your father and what you have done in your personal life?
Thank you, Alex. I have been an activist since the age of 13. I became an activist following my father's arrest by the military regime in Togo. My father was arrested over a dozen times since I was a kid, and his father before him was also an anti-colonial activist who spent years in prison fighting the French administration. And the reason why they were fighting was because my grandfather, for example, was working as thousands of other Togolese citizens for free for the government of France. They call it free labor, but it actually means slavery. Literally, they live in villages and they farm for the French government. When they don't produce enough goods, they get arrested, and sometimes their arms are mutilated for not providing the quota of agricultural products requested. So my grandfather joined the independence movement very early, and it was a relief for them when they won the independence after thousands of them got killed by the French colonialists. But unfortunately, that was very short-lived because the government of Togo realized that independence without monetary independence means nothing. Literally, you have people working and earning money that they cannot even use in their neighboring countries. You have money that has no value outside of the French colonies, and when you want to convert it to any other currency, it has to be converted first to the French franc before the euro was created, and eventually it was pegged to the euro.
So let's dwell on that. So when Farida leaves Togo to come to the U.S., if she doesn't exchange her CFAs at the border and she comes here, she can't convert them. It's not a convertible currency.
Absolutely.
And when she does convert them into euros, for example, now it's the euro and not the franc that it's pegged to, the Europeans take a cut. I mean, the corruption and the exploitation continues. And I think what you said, that true independence is not possible without monetary independence, is definitely a creed that this audience understands. But your story really makes it, I think, a lot more real for people. I want to turn my attention to Fadi. Fadi is a Palestinian activist who's spent his entire career exposing corruption in the Palestinian Authority. I want to ask Fadi about the difference between money for Americans and for Palestinians. So can you just talk about, life in the West Bank? Is it as easy as it is here? Can you just order stuff on Amazon? Can you, send money easily to friends and family? What kind of money do people use? Give us some detail.
Thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here, and special thank you for Alex because he's. Thank you. And I do want to give a special thank you to Alex because he has been my Bitcoin teacher, and I've, after many, many hours of explaining Bitcoin to me, I finally got it. So if you leave this panel with one thing about Palestine, I want you to remember one thing. I want you to replace in your minds the Free Palestine slogan with Bitcoin Palestine, because I really do believe that is the future in places like Palestine and others. So thank you, Alex. In my part of the world, the biggest problem is corruption. Corruption is what devours the institutions, what devours the idea or the hope of having a prosperous future, is the biggest enemy for prosperity and economic freedom. It is why most of if you notice, regimes in like Afghanistan, even in Iraq, and I think the Palestinian Authority eventually will collapse because the corruption has become the norm. Most of us end up leaving. Most of us end up leaving to places where we could have economic freedom, where we could have a better life. But some of us don't just enjoy that abroad, some of us dare to dream for more. And we end up being called human rights activists or anti-corruption activists, but I would like to call us dreamers, dreamers without illusions. And in my opinion, if you are a dreamer without illusion, Bitcoin is your solution. And I'll explain what I mean by that. Today, if you're a Palestinian living under two different systems, one is the Palestinian Authority system, the other is the Israeli military occupation. The freedoms you have are, we have the Oslo Agreement, which was signed in 1993 between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government, that was supposed to lead to the creation of a Palestinian state. And then there's another aspect of this agreement. It's called the Paris Protocols or the Paris Agreement, which is the economic agreement to this political agreement.
Very few people know about the Paris Protocol. Even many Palestinians don't know about it.
And here's the catch. If the Paris Protocols dictate that the Palestinians must accept or give up economic freedom to the Israeli authorities in exchange for political freedoms. Today, we have neither, but to do this, that means we have no currency of our own, no central bank, we have no control over monetary policy, and you can imagine that this kind of environment mixed with corruption, extreme corruption within the Palestinian Authority is extremely, extremely repressive for Palestinians. In order,
so just to pause, so you have to use the shekel as like the dominant daily currency.
Correct.
Right, so just imagine the psychological effect of having to use essentially your occupier's currency all the time. There's something deeply distressing about that. And again, with the Paris Protocol, the point is that the Palestinian Authority and Arafat, basically ceded economic and financial control in order to get sort of political control. Of course, they betrayed that promise to the people and became extremely corrupt, and Arafat stole billions of dollars. That's his legacy. But at the end of the day, this protocol, which was supposed to expire in '99, it still isn't in force today. There's no real effort to change it. So again, there's no agency here for Palestinians on the monetary front, wherever they are. And I think what's important to understand is that if you're in the West Bank, you can't just, order something on Amazon or, send money easily to family or friends. All these things are delayed. There's it could take weeks because, this authority has to look and kind of inspect to see if this payment is related to terrorism or whatever. It's impossible to send money to family or friends, and you can't order things online. It's extremely restrictive. There's higher inflation there. So I think we wanted to just show a little bit of this reality to you because, again, here's another country where people have no economic freedom, and it's really weighing down on them. I mean, if you think about Palestine's kind of economic engine, when you talk about an industrial base or an agricultural base, this has been wiped out systematically over decades, and that's why so many have to go work in Israel, and that's why so many like Fadi, when you're young, you want to leave, you don't want to stay. So I think what Fadi is trying to say is maybe we can design a system where people do want to stay and start to actually build something.
I genuinely believe that. I always believe that democracy cannot be exported, but it can always be imported. And there are enough Palestinians who want to have a democracy, who want to have a free financial system. And let me just give you an example. If today I want to wire money to my mother who lives in Hebron, I have to worry about almost 4 or 5 different regulatory bodies. I have to worry that the US government doesn't think I'm sending it to somebody to use it for the wrong reasons. I have to worry that the Israeli authorities will not think that I'm sending it to somebody also to use it for the wrong reasons. I also have to worry that the Palestinian Authority, who's tried to kill me before for my outspokenness on corruption and pushing for democratic reform, will not seize the money, close the bank account, or bring my mother or somebody from my family for questioning and interrogations. So it's not very simple, and the more I learn about Bitcoin, the more I realize if every person can be their own bank, I'd much rather always deal with just Bitcoin.
So, I want to use the last 10 minutes or so here to go into how Bitcoin might actually be being used in each of these scenarios and what we can all do to get involved. So Yeonmi, we'll start with you. You told me something very interesting about how some people in China are using Bitcoin to help aid North Koreans who are stuck there. Again, let's remember, people like Yeonmi who escape into China, they don't necessarily speak Chinese. They've never been to these places before. 70% of the people who escape are women, and they're trafficked or interned in some way. They have no bank account. They have no access to any sort of money system. So, Yeonmi, can you walk us through how you've heard that Bitcoin is kind of penetrating this system?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I'm sure not a lot of you have seen North Korean before, right? Because right now, there are only 209 North Korean defectors made it to America.
How many?
209 during the last 80 years. So most of North Koreans, when they escape, they do not end up like me in America.
Or even in South Korea.
No.
Most don't make it. Most get stuck in China or die.
Right. So they end up in China. And China is a communist party. They do not believe in human rights. And they sponsor Kim Jong-un to stay in power and be a dictator, right? So therefore, they do not want to help these people. And not only that, China had a one-child policy. Because of that, they have 30 million men cannot find women as their wives.
Especially in northeastern China, which borders North Korea. It's the poorest part of China, and it's the part where there's like the largest gender gap, essentially.
Yeah. So they buy North Korean girls like me as their sex slaves. And when these women go to and meet their supposedly Chinese husband, they have a child. If the women get captured and sent back to North Korea, mother gonna send to prison camp and die, and child, the problem is, cannot get a state ID. Chinese government does not accept the child as a Chinese. So they become a stateless children. And these children, without ID, government hook or something called, they cannot even go to elementary school. So there are 300,000 North Korean women right now in China, and the children are about up to even like 1 million of them. We don't know quite fully how many are there. So now there are underground church groups starting this like a homeschooling, sending Bitcoin to a Chinese broker, and they buy school supplies to children who cannot go to elementary school, so they don't end up being trafficked and going to brothels and become a prostitute. So they can somehow get educated and find a way out. And there's a way that we can empower these women and children through Bitcoin. Thank you.
I had mentioned to you earlier today that when I first met you, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago, how crazy is it that one day we'd be speaking together at a Bitcoin conference? And you didn't know what Bitcoin was at the time. And now you've been studying it, you know a lot about it. What do you think, if you could go back to North Korea and start telling people that there's this currency that's digital, that governments don't control, I mean, once that starts to pick up traction inside North Korea, what do you think will happen?
I think that's a thing. Like when this morning we had talked about how the fiat currency, 169 million people died, right? Like in my life, nothing has been more evil than government has been. I think North Korean regime is almost testament how evil a government can be to individuals. So I think if North Korean people, there's a way they can understand that they can have their own autonomy, decide what money they can buy, what they can do, I think we will see a different world. It's gonna be a world that we cannot even possibly fathom right now, because we've been always under this government's control. And when imagine that individuals have that power in our hands, we can create a much better world that nobody needs to be sold.
Farida, turning to you, let's talk about some of the initiatives you're doing, how you're helping activists in Togo learn about this new technology, and then tell us about this amazing conference that you and Fode and many others are going to be putting on in Ghana later this year.
Thank you, Alex. The interesting thing about Bitcoin is that it offers us the unique opportunity to truly decolonize our country. And to
truly decolonize your country.
Yeah, so I call the Bitcoin the currency of decolonization. Because we have never really had the opportunity to have a currency that aids us both in attaining our economic freedom, but also our political freedom. So activists in Togo today are continuing to resist the authoritarian regime. Hundreds of them have been arrested and are living in prison and are not receiving any form of support. And the government goes as far as arresting nursing mothers because they are affiliated to a protest movement against the regime. So literally, we have a system today where we have a fund where we provide support, legal support, medical support to women, as well as political prisoners that are facing this form of repression and abuse from the authoritarian government of Togo. And thanks to the HRF, we established what we call the Igaye Academy, which is now going to deploy an education program that is going to allow Togolese activists, organizers, and citizens as a whole to better understand what the Bitcoin means and how we can start to resist the CFA system by using the Bitcoin. But more interestingly, it's going to provide us a way of fighting the regime more anonymously, because years ago, hundreds of thousands of Togolese citizens actually rose against the military regime, and they were crushed with severe repression. The money that was raised to fund those protests came from the Togolese diaspora living in Europe, in America, and many parts of the world. But the regime found a way to block access to sending that money, and some people were actually arrested and are still in prison because they sent money back home to support protesters or to fund somebody who is close to the
So they're able to strangle the protest movement through control of money.
So today with the Bitcoin, people can send money back anonymously and can fund protests and can fund activist groups and can support political prisoners without fearing for their own lives and that of their families and relatives.
Now, give us a quick sense of the conference in December that Fode mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so today we are organizing as African Bitcoiners, Fode in Senegal, another friend called Gloire in the DRC, and we are planning on bringing Bitcoiners from all over Africa and beyond. You're invited if you want to join us in Accra, Ghana in December, because we believe this is a technology that we have to expand to the entire continent, and it is an opportunity for us as Africans to have a currency that is not based on colonialism, where you can move from Togo to Ghana to Nigeria and Kenya and still be able to have your money keep its value.
Well, the Human Rights Foundation is very proud to support your conference, so we will be a sponsor of this event.
Thank you.
And then Fadi, tell us about your effort to give Palestinians, a bank account that they can actually control. You at one of our events, you met a rather enterprising open source software developer, and basically you guys have been doing some interesting things with hardware wallets. So tell us about it.
I've been talking to Seed Signer, and
shout out to Seed Signer.
Yes. And we're having a bit of difficulty now, so we really do need your help in terms of expertise and ideas because of the supply chain shortages in Raspberry Pis, and we're trying to figure out a solution that would make it available for Palestinians to have their hardware wallet to own Bitcoin and be able to transact and pay and get paid by Bitcoin. So please, if you could help us with this, please reach out to me or to Seed Signer.
Absolutely.
That would be amazing. Thank you, Fadi.
Thank you.
So with the couple minutes we have left here, I just wanted to ask each of you to tell the crowd how they can get involved with what you're doing, and what they can do to help, the efforts you have at the intersection of Bitcoin and freedom. We'll start with you, Yeonmi.
Yeah.
Tell us about your book and all the other things you're up to.
Yes, I have a book called In Order to Live. It's a memoir. I think a lot of people really don't understand what's happening in North Korea, and you can really understand how 25 million people are surviving in that darkness. And not only that, we also partner with the Human Rights Foundation, and we try to disseminate information into North Korea and let the North Korean people know that they've been enslaved by this dictatorship, and there's a way to fight for their own freedom. So please join us with the HRF. And what's the next website name?
You can come to hrf.org, and we'll put you in touch with Yeonmi. Farida, quickly, how can folks get involved? Tell us the URL of the conference and how else they can support what you're doing in West Africa.
Absolutely. They can also sign up for the upcoming conference in Africa on afrobitcoin.org.
Can you say that again?
afrobitcoin.org.
Perfect.
We need people to understand that Bitcoin is not something created by a government. It is people who think about and value freedom that came together to develop this technology. And you have people, millions of people fighting for that freedom on a day-to-day basis, and you have a unique opportunity to contribute to that struggle with your resources, with your intelligence, with your networks, and we want you to support us in that venue. Paxful, for example, was willing to help us train our educators in Togo on how to train others on the ground on Bitcoin.
Amazing.
If you want to join our Bitcoin training program and want to help us train more people or get resources to help people get trained on the continent, we will really welcome that support.
Amazing. Shout out to Ray and team at Paxful. And then Fadi, obviously folks can get in touch to discuss the hardware wallet project. And then you and I were also discussing, hey, why not a virtual summit for the West Bank where we can bring Bitcoin speakers in virtually and we can have content in Arabic and English.
We will do the first Bitcoin summit conference in virtually. Everybody's invited, Palestinian, Israeli, whatever you are. We want to learn from you. We want you to be joining our effort. To me, I think Bitcoin is a tool for peace. The way my friends here described it as a tool for freedom, as a tool to fight. In my part of the world, I think it can be a tool for peace that brings people together and allows us to have more even economic ties.
Well, just remember, it's not just freedom money, it's refugee money, it's decolonial money, and it's peace money. And with that, we thank you so much. If you want to learn more from our amazing speakers, you should join us at the Oslo Freedom Forum later this year. Thank you, Yeonmi. Thank you, Farida. Thank you, Fadi. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.